The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents What Should or Shouldn't Change Your Mind About the Existence of a God? So this is something I've addressed many times, and some of you will be familiar with the answer that I give now, but I want to tell a little bit of a backstory about coming across this with other prominent atheist speakers and a new potential argument or situation that might give us better evidence for God. I quite often heard the sort of glib answers and even heard from, there was an event where Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins were talking and they were on stage and they presented the sort of, but if there was, writing in the sky that everyone could read in whatever languages they could understand, that might count as evidence for God. And I talked to, I've talked to both of them, but I specifically pointed out that, as Arthur C. Clarke points out, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And because of that, there's no example that you could give that would confirm that a God existed or confirm it's from a God. There are some that would be so outside the realm of what we might expect using technology that you could say this is coming from either some advanced technology that's beyond our ability to comprehend, so much so that it is godlike. And so it's either the technology or it's a God, or, we can't tell the difference. And if we can't tell the difference between an incredibly advanced technology and magic or some sort of God power or some sort of supernatural power, then there's a justification for considering them equivalent. When you're looking at how high can a human jump, well, we may not know what the highest that a human can jump is, but once we see a human jump a certain height, we now have raised that bar. And if somebody came in and said, well, I know a human that can jump all the way to the moon, that may not be a God, but that is a power that would be at least moving the needle more interestingly towards godlike powers. And I was thinking the other day, what if there was a voice in my head that could read, understand, and interpret every language, no matter whether I've studied them or not? We could go a step further and make it so that this voice could get me to speak a different language with perfect or reasonable, good diction and vocabulary and pronunciation and things like that. Would that then confirm that there's a God? No. I stand by what I said before, that I don't know of any example that would in fact confirm a God, because how do you rule out some other explanation? You would at least have the door slightly more open to a God. There are people who are religious who think that God speaks to them and that this God provides them with information. This God is able to help them find things or give them words of wisdom or tell them things about people. And it's shocking how specific it can be when there's no way to verify, and how vague it can be for anything that might be verifiable. And then there are the people who speak in tongues, and not just, I'm going to speak a language that somebody claims I don't know, or that I'm going to claim I don't know, but speaking in the tongue of angels, the sort of babbling of, these sorts of things have been studied, and they don't have any identifiable structure that would identify them as a language that one could actually interpret and convey concepts with. And you never see someone speaking in one of these languages or speaking in the tongues of angels or whatever, and then being able to interpret, or someone else being able to reliably interpret it. If I said, I'm going to I just made that up, but maybe I didn't. Maybe it's the tongue of angels. And 10 different people independently came up with the same translation of this language that I'm doing. Well, okay, maybe I'm then speaking a language. Maybe we can demonstrate that there's consistency in me conveying an idea and people being able to understand it. That's what language is. It's like I don't speak, well, let's just say I don't speak anything but English. Although I took 2 years of Spanish in high school, I can't speak Spanish. You could drop me in Mexico and I would muddle through. You could drop me in Spain. You could drop me pretty much anywhere, and I would try to find a way. But I would be relying on the fact that most people will be able to point me to somebody who speaks English. That's just the way it is for me. But there are people who reportedly have past life experiences where they come out speaking languages that they would have had no way of learning. Those claims are dubious at best. We haven't been able to confirm any of it. And how do you show that someone never learned or never had access to learning a language? And so because there is an opportunity for deception and trickery, we can't reliably confirm that they're able, that they're speaking a language that they don't know. This is going to sound a little strange because it's not touching on the same subject, but in a way it is. A guy the other day posted a tweet where he had asked his 10 and 11-year-old daughters to review a video of some people partying and tell him what they thought. And they pointed out that they were dressed immodestly and acting immodestly. And he tweeted, they gave that answer with no prompting from him. They correctly identified the folks in the video as engaging in immoral behavior. No prompting from him is delusional or dishonest or both. You can't raise kids for 10 or 11 years, ask them to evaluate a situation, and then pretend that the answer they gave you, which you're happy about, was done without prompting from you. You had 10 or 11 years to teach them. And it's not a miracle that they were able to give the answer that they thought Dad was looking for. And yet, this is the way people think, they did this without any prompting from me. This is the same sort of thing we get when we hear about people who, this child, was 8 years old and claims to be the reincarnation of so-and-so and can speak this other language that we never taught him. Okay, how do you prove all of that? And then let's assume you did prove all of it. What then is the explanation for their ability to speak that language? How did you determine that the best explanation for their ability to speak that language is that they were in fact reincarnated, or that there was a God or some sort of supernatural element that was interacting with them and allowing them to do this? The truth is that we point to some things and say, that's beyond my understanding of the natural world, therefore I'm going to label it supernatural, when we don't have any justification for that. We can't imagine how this could happen, and yet it happened, and so we will say that it's supernatural, it's a miracle, it is from the gods, it is, etc. So if I could read, speak, and interpret any language put in front of me, would that confirm God? No, not even to me. But we could certainly confirm that I had some great skill for which we don't currently have an explanation. The notion that I could understand and speak and read more languages than anybody else on the planet, and languages that I essentially had never interacted with, would require an explanation. And certainly, even though we haven't even demonstrated that God is a candidate explanation, certainly the claims about God would be included in, we'll at least count that as a potential, but we have no way of telling which of the potential explanations is actually correct. My answer to what would change your mind has not been anything to do with glib sort of riding in the sky or miracle performances. My answer was this: I don't know what would change my mind, but if there is in fact a God, that God should know exactly what would change my mind, and should be capable of doing the thing that would change my mind. And because that hasn't happened yet, either that God doesn't exist, or that God doesn't want me to know that it exists yet. That's a rather long answer, but what it is it's about showing the humility that I don't know how to tell the difference between an incredibly advanced technology and a miracle or something godlike. Even if there was something supernatural, I don't know how to tell that. And even if I could, that wouldn't allow me to distinguish between a supernatural God and a supernatural demon or any powerful thing beyond me. But this is the fun part for me. Let's imagine there's a voice in my head or writing in the sky, communications you don't understand, visions, predictions, all of these things which would be an amazing start toward verifying some sort of special power. Perhaps it's supernatural, perhaps it's technology you don't understand. Those things don't happen. In the entire history of the world, we have no verified accounts of things like that happening. We have reports of things like that are seemingly beyond our ability to investigate. There's something that we can't replicate. Generally speaking, those things just don't happen. Just like in debates about the resurrection, I did a debate with Mike Lacona where he suggested if we chopped off someone's head and we all left and they were here dead, decapitated, and we all left and went in the other room, and they came walking in the room with their head attached a little later, even that would not convince Matt that God exists. And Mike's right. That would not convince me that God exists. And it shouldn't. And you can mock me all you want. Oh, look how unreasonable Matt is. Even if we chopped off somebody's head and they came walking in with their head attached again, Matt still wouldn't believe in God. Correct. But you know what I would believe? I would believe that that person was decapitated and they're now alive. And I don't know what the explanation for that is. And I would be happy to explore potential explanations. You can mock me for being ridiculous, but you're not going to be able to mock me for being gullible. I'm right. I am correct that chopping off someone's head and having them come back to life doesn't confirm that a God exists. It could be that it's a God, but it doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't happen. It never happens. Show me a case where we've cut off somebody's head and they come back to life. Mike and others use that as an excuse. They say, God knows that this won't convince Matt, and so God won't do it. Really? Surely that would convince somebody. You think it would convince you. You think it should convince anybody. So why not just have it happen, convince all the people who are going to be convinced, and then just write me off as the obstinate, super hard skeptic? It doesn't happen. It never happens. Theists keep coming up with examples of, well, if this happened, would that change your mind about God? No. I'm sorry that you keep coming up with one bad possible argument for God after another, but I'm not going to be convinced until you can demonstrate that the best explanation is that a God did this. And that means you have to show that a God should be considered a candidate explanation in that particular scenario. But the one area that seems to be somewhat sacred is here, my own mind. I can't prove that whatever voice I might have heard was a God, but I can test its accuracy if there's this voice giving me information or answering questions about language, etc. I can judge if that voice's guidance is reliable. And if in fact it is a God, interacting with it should be trivial. An agent that wants to interact, that's telling me things, I should be able to ask the voice in my head, or the voice that I perceive in my head, even if it's external. I should be able to ask it questions and get answers. I should be able to walk onto any quiz show and get every single answer correct. If this God knows other people's thoughts, which it seems that most of the gods we're suggesting could be real, would know other people's thoughts, I could appear to read minds. That God could tell me what you're thinking, and I could relay it to you. And as long as we're breaking this barrier between the sacred, marked off portion of my brain and the portion of your brain that I don't normally have access to, if you can think of something and God can access it and God can tell me, then maybe we're closer to demonstrating that there is a God that's giving me accurate information about what's only happening in your head. I could speak languages that I don't know. I could read languages I don't know. I could read codes that are private between two people. You get two identical twins that have invented their own language that only the two of them knows. If God knows it, I know it. While we couldn't rule out technology, how do you know whether or not some sufficiently advanced civilization has developed technology for reading minds? Can't rule that out. It would certainly move the needle closer to, here's evidence for something godlike. But it never happens. The people getting messages from God seem to get messages about future events that may or may not be accurate, may need interpretation. They can't tell me what number I'm thinking of. Let me invent a cipher where only I have the key. It will be a relatively simple, esoteric, but precise cipher where one single short string of characters represents some other string of characters. Something like FSDJKLA 32102 FDKA exclamation mark pound sign. That string of characters represents something in my cipher. Maybe it represents peanut butter. Maybe it represents 8675309. Maybe it represents DFJ 2391 Fergal Burgle Dang 29. Doesn't matter. The point is, I should be able to give out this character string, kind of like private encryption, and no computer on the planet would be able to decode it. Because the way decoding tends to work is you need context and you need a longer section, and you need to be able to assess what it is that the message is. But just a string of characters with no other context, nothing to compare it to, being presented, how could you possibly encode it or decode it? If you can crack my code, that would definitely be step one toward confirming that something is capable of reading my mind. Because that information apparently only exists here. Whether or not it's a god or an advanced technology, I don't know. It wouldn't be proof for anyone else, but it would confirm to me that the code is cracked. But once we've confirmed to me that the code is cracked, if we can reliably do this, which is one of the key aspects of being able to verify things in reality, is to make something replicable, to reproduce those results. You can begin moving down that direction to convince virtually any reasonable agent on the planet that we have good reason to believe that there is mind-reading technology, and that maybe that mind-reading technology is God. And if it can read your mind and convey that information to me, then essentially I can read your mind. And similarly, if that God can do that for me, it can do it for you. So now we're right back to the real issue. God could absolutely reveal itself to anyone and everyone in the exact ways that they need to have not only their personal standards met, but to be rationally convinced that a God exists. To make it so that we don't have to have discussions about the problem of divine hiddenness. God could reveal itself. So what should change your mind about a God? I don't know. I still don't know. It would be arrogant of us to say that we do know, that we should know, because it would almost require a godlike understanding to know what would discern a God from a non-God, or to go down the Arthur C. Clarke route, to be able to tell the difference between an advanced technology that we don't understand and magic. So for now, what should change your mind about God? Well, obviously, evidence that is sufficient to warrant accepting it. But that's not a clear definition of what that entails. And you're not going to get one. What you're going to get is a bunch of people telling you what convinced them, or more often, avoiding answering the question of what convinced them. We're not going to see people with their heads lopped off coming back to life. We're not going to see people speaking languages that we can confirm they knew nothing about, and interpreting things and understanding things, or reading people's minds. None of those things ever happen. in any way that's verifiable. And so we're right back to this issue of what should change your mind? Evidence. And I don't know the specific evidence, but there are people telling me there's a God that should absolutely know exactly what would convince me and hasn't done it. But boy, wouldn't it be cool for God to show off like that, to make someone capable of reading minds, to be able to stand up in the pulpit on a Sunday and say, welcome, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to be God's conduit here and tell you all what you're thinking. Think ridiculous stuff. Here, you come up with a number between 1 and, I don't know, infinite. Shouldn't matter. You come up with that number. You think of a word. You think of a moment in time. Oh, God says you're thinking of this. God says you're thinking of this. God says you're thinking of this. You could come up with the best sort of magic mind reading show ever if you were God. There's incredible effects like that magicians and mentalists can replicate. But there are things that evidently magicians and mentalists can't do. But God should be able to. And yet God doesn't. So I guess the follow-up question is not so much as how do you reconcile divine hiddenness with non-resistant non-belief, but why isn't God doing any of the things to make this easier for people to understand and stop arguing about whether or not he exists and move on to understanding what we need to do about it and how best we can live in this world? See you next time. Bye-bye.